Hello and welcome back to our system design series where we cover either interview prep questions or just concepts in system design. Today we're going to be talking about one of those concepts called API gateways and why they're an essential enterprise pattern for modern large distributed systems. So before we get into what an API gateway is, the reason it's important to know these enterprise architecture patterns, even if you're only ever implementing these little microservices, is so you can get a broader picture of what an enterprise would look for in their developers, right? Do they have experience with API gateways? Do they have experience with large distributed systems? And even if they don't, can they talk the talk and understand what's going on? So what is an API gateway? This is a high-level definition, but a single entry point for client requests to backend services. It acts as a reverse proxy, routing requests to microservice. It sits between the client and the backend service architecture. It decouples any client interface from the backend implementation. If you have a gateway that gives you a URL or some sort of connection point, it doesn't really matter what the down the stream service is because it's abstracted away by this gateway. It centralizes the cross-cutting concerns across all services and provides unified API servers for diverse backend systems. So let's get into what that actually means. So if you have this massive enterprise system, you want to be able to have a replicable, scalable way to deploy and utilize backend services. So the first one is request routing. Routes incoming requests to appropriate backend services. So if you have a client consumer that's coming into your system, you want to be able to delegate it to the correct people, whether that's just to different service endpoints, to different microservices, or to different load-bearing servers where you've done distributed caching or other things that allow you to do load balancing across these server instances. Now, another huge reason these enterprises love gateways is because they centralize authentication and authorization for all services. So things like Azure API Management or Apigee, you can do policies that require OAuth 2.0 and JWT token verification that's done the same way every single time. Other things are like rate limiting, like we talked about a couple weeks ago, where you can do that actually at the gateway level instead of the backend service level. So the developer can just do, here's my new microservice, and then the gateway can worry about things like rate limiting. Now, then that was the next point. I was ahead of myself with the traffic management, right? You can throttle requests, but you can also do other circuit breaker patterns or request and response caching, right? Oh, you've hit this database 7 times with the exact same query. Well, I'll throw it up at the gateway level instead of at the application level. So you can keep your application simple, but get enterprise patterns at the gateway level. Some of the observability features that are really nice for enterprises is that there's centralized logging of all API requests, right? If everything's coming into this single point, you also get all this logging from the same place. Now, you can also get distributed tracing across these microservices, the request and response transformations, and any analytics on API consumption patterns. Now, if you were to implement this all piecemeal, right, each different microservice, there'd be a lot of shared things. So, just like the drive principle, do this at the gateway level instead. Another reason is that it simplifies any client integration, right? Client interacts with one endpoint instead of many. So if you're talking to many different microservices, but really you kind of want a nice API level, one way that you could do this, such as AWS Lambdas with an API management, you just have the Lambdas be the individual endpoints, but you're actually only ever calling in to the API management. Now, some of the other things are the organizational agility, right? Teams can evolve services independently behind the gateway. They can keep changing, but the client only ever knows about this monolithic gateway, right? It's easy to add those extra services. It's easy to rev the versions, and you just get to have that abstraction of the client just goes to the gateway and calls it a day. Some of the most common use cases for API gateways are for exposing internal microservices to external partners, aggregating multiple service calls into a single response, transforming things into REST APIs. This isn't just SOAP, but also things like MCPs. You can expose this in different ways. There's also security policies across all APIs that are enforced in a consistent and replicable way in gateways. Now, some of the most common ones are going to be Google's Cloud API, Azure API, and AWS API Gateway. And then, like I was talking about earlier, that Lambda integration is really nice because now you can just have these serverless computes running your endpoints, right? There are also some self-hosted options, but that's going to be less common for an enterprise situation where you're coming in and you're saying, oh, I want to have the security. I'm going to use what my cloud provider gives me. Now, some of the key factors when implementing an API gateway or standing one up yourself is avoid making the gateway a monolithic bottleneck, right? So if you have these really, really large distributed systems, gateways are great. If you have two services, only ever two services, don't have the monolithic bottleneck stop you from having agile development. Now, design for high availability, right? You're not just creating a gateway, but you need to design your policies in such a way that they're not redundant, and use caching and use all the services and use all the features that are in these enterprise gateways, such as APIM or Apogee. Now, keep your business logic out of the gateway. You should only be doing security level concerns. Don't have, and you can get your policies can become pretty complex, but some things need to stay at the application level. There's a reason the application level is still complex, and don't confuse single for better. And then, like we were talking about earlier, this is horizontal scaling. The reason we do this is because these are large systems, so keep that in mind. And we're going to skip these anti-patterns because I think as you get and learn and start using the gateway, a lot of these anti-patterns kind of come out. It's like, oh, this is getting really hard to do, right? There's too many policies and there's too many things. You kind of just have to understand that the gateway is an extra layer and it is a great way for you to gain enterprise standard of code, but it shouldn't do much more than that. It should be an additional feature. It shouldn't, if your application didn't go through gateway, it shouldn't just fall on its face. So some of those great steps to, oh, I need to adopt this, or when you're in an interview question, they say, oh, well, what are the purposes? Why would you want to adopt this? These are the great ones, right? Authentication and basic routing, rate limiting, caching, instrumenting. All these things are really good. And then finally, just as a summary, API gateways are critical for enterprise architecture. Anything at scale is going to require more thought than just a single application. Single entry point simplifies client integration without being a single point of failure because these enterprise gateways are designed to be fault tolerant. Another thing is they centralize security, routing, and traffic management. Another one, they enable service independence and agility, right? When you want to rev your backend services, you can do breaking changes, but you can be more cognizant and more aware that you can have A/B testing, those kind of things. Provides observability across distributed systems. And finally, this is an essential pattern for microservices at scale. But it's just a little look into what gateways do for you and the reasons you should be using them. And if it ever comes up and now you kind of know the term API gateway, happy coding.